I think it's interesting. I don't remember when I first learned why the Battle of Gettysburg was fought here. I imagine that most people have heard that the battle was fought because there were shoes and the Southerners were coming to get shoes. I think I was fortunate enough to read Bruce Catton early on. So I might have known that the battle was fought because of the road system. And so the shoe thing always just seemed to me to be kind of funny. You might know in one of my videos, I make a big deal out of the shoe thing. I think people took me seriously. Let me just say I'm joking. But I want to open up a restaurant called the Shoe Factory. And it, we'll have like shoes hanging from the rafters, and everybody be dressed up like Civil War soldiers. And I have quotes on the wall about how the Southerners are coming to Gettysburg to get shoes. And then when someone asks the tour guide where the shoe factory is, they can point them to my restaurant. And I think, delving into that might be a good promotional idea for Gettysburg to have a shoe factory. But we try to make it really clear on our tours of the battlefield as guides that the battle is fought at Gettysburg because the roads led them there. And there was a video that I had seen, I guess it came out in the 1980s. It was narrated by Stacy Keach. I think it was called Gettysburg, The Final Fury, when VHS really started to come up, be a big thing. And they had some footage from Bruce Catton that was shot near the angle in, I think, 1962. And he was asked that question, and he gave that quote. That quote is also in a book that he wrote about the Battle of Gettysburg, The Final Fury. And I think that's legitimate. If you want to know more about this topic, and I'll probably talk for like an hour or maybe a little more, so you might leave during the middle of the program. So I wanted to mention it downstairs in the bookstore. I think I went out in the garage and got some more of them, but we have a journal. The journal number 3, there's an article by Woody Christ about the road system in Gettysburg at the time of the battle. And if we were out of this in the bookstore, we might have sold them all, because it's from 1997. It is available free of charge on the internet, on the Gettysburg College website. It's called The Cupola, for the cupola of Pennsylvania Hall, I'd imagine. The Cupola. And you can actually download it and just put it on your computer and get the whole article for free with the maps and all. So that's if you want to read more about what we're going to talk about. So here he is from his book, The Final Fury, in 1974. The armies fought at Gettysburg because the roads led them there. And that is the beginning and the end of why the battle was fought at Gettysburg. Because Gettysburg, a large amount of roads concentrated in this area. And as the armies are marching through the region, there was no way for them to avoid the road hub. And once they started marching on roads that led into this area, both armies were sucked into this town. And of course, the battle started as a small battle, and as more and more troops arrived, it escalated because of the road system. And, just to give you a little idea, here's the map that appears in Harper's Weekly magazine shortly after the battle. And that's why Gettysburg is so large on the map. But you can see the nearest larger towns in this area I kind of just marked on the map. Of course, we're 10 miles north of the Mason-Dixon line. And then, we have York, Harrisburg, Carlisle, Chambersburg, Hagerstown, Frederick, I think I put on there, that's Emmitsburg. There's Frederick. Emmitsburg, Westminster, and of course I put Baltimore on the map, just to get an idea of the larger towns in the area that are near us. there are mentions of the road hub early on after the battle. Charles Carlton Coffin was a reporter for the Boston Tribune, and his articles appear in numerous newspapers, but he actually was on Cemetery Hill on July 2nd during the battle. And his explanation of the battlefield is awesome. And he's talking about the battle while the battle is occurring. But he writes this, speaking of Gettysburg, it is a focus for roads north, east, south, and west from nearly all points of the compass. You are reminded of a spider or a bug or an old daddy long legs with its numerous limbs reaching in all directions. I absolutely love that. A daddy long legs. The Adams County Historical Society, which are, as currently we know our society, it kind of started in 1940. At one of our meetings early on in 1942, one of our members gave a lecture, D.C. Jacobs, and he said that more roads intersect at Gettysburg than any other place in Pennsylvania. Yeah, Philadelphia doesn't have as many roads as we do. I always think that's silly, but wow, what a statement. Edward Stackpole, again, I was highly influenced by Edward Stackpole because it was the first real book I read on the Battle of Gettysburg, just for, a one-volume history of the battle. I had read other Civil War books, in elementary school and stuff like that, or had the Junior Heritage Library book of Gettysburg by Bruce Cadden. But this was a serious book about the battle that came out in 1956. And so I guess I always had this stuck in my head. Gettysburg is the hub of a network of 12 roads, 10 main roads, and 2 branch roads, which angled out in every direction. And that comes into play when we talk about how many roads were there. So I have always been one to tell people that 10 roads lead to Gettysburg. But then there's 2 branch roads we'll talk about. Samuel Bates, who wrote a history of the Battle of Gettysburg in 1875, wrote that, they approach Gettysburg from almost every point of the compass, centering here like spokes in the hub of a wheel. And I think most tour guides use that as a description when they're talking about the road system in Gettysburg, like it's the center of the hub of a wheel with the roads branching out on the different spokes. Maybe that's better than daddy long legs, I don't know. But you see that a lot. The spokes of a wheel. And so how many roads are there? And what are the names of the roads? And, so we'll talk about these as I go along here. But starting at the bottom, of course, we have the Emmitsburg Road, the Tawnytown Road, the Baltimore Pike, the Hanover Road, the York Road, and the Hunterstown Road, the Harrisburg Road, the Carlisle Road, the Newville Road, the Mummersburg Road, the Chambersburg Pike, and the Fairfield Road. And that's 12. So I would say that most people don't count the Hunterstown Road as one of the roads that leads to Gettysburg. And I, suspect that when Stackpole mentions 2 roads that are not, roads that come in that are not really main roads, that he's talking about that road. Now, it's much more difficult when you get up here, about a half a mile north of us, where there's a split, because today, most people believe that the Newville Road is the Carlisle Road. And if you were driving to Carlisle, you would go up here and you would bear off to the left and you would go up. But do you know that when you get up near Bendersville, instead of going downtown into Bendersville, the road veers off to the right and it goes by, I don't even know what it's called now, Cool Breeze, Shanks, Cameos. Good. That's right. I did know that. And then you take that road over through Gardner's and Aspers, and it comes out in Idaville. But, just before you get to Idaville, there's a road that comes in from the left, the old Carlisle Road. And then when you go through Idaville, you're once again on that road, Carlisle Road. So today we have a road that goes over and connects these two. But at the time of the Civil War, there was no connector road. If you went up that road, you went right through the town of Bendersville, over the mountains to Pine Grove Furnace. So at the time of the Civil War, the Table Rock Road is actually the Carlisle Road. And the other road goes up through Bendersville and over to Newville in Cumberland County. So just a point of clarification. So obviously, one of those two roads is not being counted when you talk about 10 roads. One of them is a branch road. And, I have trouble looking at all the accounts, figuring out which one is the branch road and which one's not. Depending on, to me, Carlisle Road is more important than going to Newville. Who wants to go to Newville? How many people have even ever been to Newville? Okay. So a few people. Good. But you get the idea of what I'm talking about there. So there's obviously 10 or 12 roads that lead into the town, depending on how you count. This is interesting, and I did not have this in my show before. I just put this in here. So if you've seen this show, this is something new. The Gettysburg National Military Park Commission report for October 1900 has a listing in it. And I hadn't picked up on this, that they erected markers on all the roads leading into the town. I have only ever seen a photograph of one of these 12 markers. And if you watch my Monuments, Markers, and Tablets, Monuments Monday, you might notice that I talk about monuments that were once out there that are no longer there. None of these 12 monuments, I guess we call them markers, monuments, markers, and tablets, but markers, none of these 12 are there anymore. And I can't even find photographs of them. But obviously here they say they put them up. And they tell you the roads that they put them up on. And you can see, like, for instance, that they put a marker out on the Hunterstown Road, giving the distance between Gettysburg and Hunterstown. And here you go. I have one of these in a photograph. On the Hagerstown Road, they give the distances from Gettysburg to Fairfield, from Gettysburg to Monterey, from Gettysburg to Waynesboro, from Gettysburg to Hagerstown. And there it was. It's set at the entrance to West Confederate Avenue and the Fairfield Road. And you can see it has the distances to all the other places. So at one time, 1900, they put these up. I have no idea how long they were there. Like I said, I can't seem to find other ones in photographs. They had markers on the various roads that led to here, so you can look at them and see how many miles things are away. 34 to I think on my tours, I don't know how other people do it, but on my tours, I think I tell people the Potomac River is 42 miles from Gettysburg. I don't even know how I know some of these things. But probably the distances come from, the towns and stuff from these different markers. And I think I tell people Cashtown's 8 miles from Gettysburg. But I guess it depends where you start your count from. I know if you look in Gelso's book, his distances are all wrong. So, what's interesting about this? And again, maybe it's just because I had read Edward Stackpole's book as a kid. I never had problems with the number of roads. But when you pick up various books, people are confused about the number of roads that lead here. So references that there are 12 roads. Here's Robert K. Beecham, The Pivotal Battle of the Civil War from 1911. He was a member of the 2nd Wisconsin Infantry. He wrote a really good book on the battle. And he says a dozen highways lead into and converge at Gettysburg. And they were all there in 1863. Okay. Henry Ropes wrote a history of the Civil War in 1913, and he also says there are 12 roads. And I put down here on the bottom, when I was a kid, there was a video game, or not a video game, it was a CD-ROM game of the Battle of Gettysburg, and it was called 12 Roads to Gettysburg. And I was really confused when I got that game. I'm like, what? Why would they put 12 roads? And then there are sources that say there are 11 roads. Chapman Biddle, who wrote a history of the 121st Pennsylvania in 1880, wrote that 11 roads, several of them well macadamized, center at Gettysburg. And the history of the 141st Pennsylvania, 1885, says there are 11 roads. So here's my question. If you're saying there's 11 roads, which road are you not counting as a road? Because obviously you're counting, one of those two. Perhaps you're not counting the Hunterstown Road. And here's John Batchelder. In 1873, he wrote in his Gettysburg, What to See and How to See It, it is a center of 11 different roads which radiate from it like the spokes of a wheel from a common center. And again, I think most people describe it as the spokes of a wheel. 11. So again, I'd like to ask John Batchelder, which road is he not counting if he's counting 11? So 10 roads is definitely the most common. And here's some early examples of that. John Vanderslice, 1894. He wrote the history of the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association. So this is the official history of the entity that, purchased property at that time. And of course, the Comte de Paris, who came to Gettysburg and wrote a book in 1888, says there are 10 roads. The National Park Service is all over the place with their description of how many roads there are. I think I liken it back to the old visitor center where you'd go to the front desk, pick up the pamphlet, and they'd have a number of men who were killed in the battle, and then on the wall there was a thing telling you how many men were killed in the battle, and it was different, and then you went to the electric map, and there was a different total given for the number of men killed. Like, just be consistent. But they have 9 roads in most of their park literature. So, again, we know the 2 branch roads, but what road are you not counting if you say there's only 9 roads? Fairfield, maybe the Mummersburg Road. Who'd want to go to Mummersburg? That's what I always like to do, too. I try to tell people that. We get lots of visitors that, come and they return a few times. And like, what can we do? And I always say, hey, ride to each of the towns that the roads lead to and spend some time there. Drive to Mummersburg or Heidlersburg, visit these places. So, this is a pretty new book. James Fritz, who comes in here often, wrote a history of architecture of Adams County. And the first thing I noticed was he said that 9 roads led into the town. And I was like, well, wow, Jim, which road are you not counting? And Jim showed me his map and said, what are you talking about? So there's a map in his book. I was like, oh, okay. And if you count around the outside edges, you'll see there's 9. He forgot to put the York Pike on his map. So maybe some of it, sometimes when you're not counting a road, it's just because you're using a map that doesn't have all the roads on it. Here's Elsie Singmaster in a book she wrote about the history of the battle, or an article she wrote for a magazine, 8 roads. And, we even can find 7 roads in some of the accounts. So, but again, for the sake of ease, there are technically 12 roads, but 2 of them aren't really main roads or the branch roads. And definitely one of those is the Hunterstown Road, and the other one probably would be what we call today the Table Rock Road. So there's some confusion there. So, and the important thing about the roads is almost all the roads were used by the troops in their march towards the battlefield, as the Southern Army mostly approached from the north and the west, and the Northern Army approached from the south and southeast. And one can only imagine the civilians in the area at their farms or sitting on their fences or on their porches and watching thousands and thousands and thousands of troops march by their house. And, you know, for most of the people in the area, when the troops marched by, this was the most people they'd ever seen in one place in their entire lives. So the impact that it made. Also, I like to point out, and you know, sometimes I stay up all night thinking of these things. But have you noticed that if you talk about the 10 roads that lead into Gettysburg, the Gettysburg National Military Park, it has a boundary against 9 of these 10 roads. And if you want to talk about the 12 roads, we have kind of a boundary along 10 of the 12 roads. So which one of the 10 roads is there no park boundary on? The York Pike. Yeah. And have you seen the York Pike? Yeah. Now, I guess you could argue that because there's battlefield property against most of the roads, it's prohibited development along those roads and forced the development into the area east of the town. Or you could say Strabane Township has no rules to restrict development and it's out of control. Now, on the Harper's Weekly map, which came out after the battle, it's interesting that I think they only show 6 of the roads. They're missing the Harrisburg Road and looks like the Mummersburg Road, and they're missing the Tawnytown Road and the Baltimore. I'm sorry, the Tawnytown Road, the Baltimore Pikes there, and and the Emmitsburg Road. So therefore, so it's interesting. I like this map that appears in Harper's Weekly. It is the first known reference to the town of Germantown. That's north of Littlestown. I've never found it referred to in an earlier map. But sure enough, there's a sign there that says Germantown if you go by. This is a 1829 map. Is that right? I might get the date wrong. 1822 map of York and Adams County that shows Gettysburg. And on this map, you can see there are, here's a colorized version of it. There are 9 of the 10 roads that lead into town, and 11 of the 12 roads if you count the 2 branch roads here. And the only road that was established after this map that we count as one of the roads is the Newville Road, which is a northern extension of Carlisle Street, and then, you know, it runs out towards Biglerville. That was an 1829 road, and that's why it's not on this map. 1822 is this map. Also, I do not know why. Let's see, Baltimore Turnpike, the Turnpike. I guess they're turnpikes. The dots are turnpikes, meaning you have to pay to use them. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Also, on this map, I didn't put a big version of it, but there's Plum Run. There are 3 Plum Runs on Adams County maps prior to the battle, and none of them are the Plum Run that we call Plum Run. I guess that would be White's Run today, that Plum Run. But here's the 1858 map. And the 1858 map, which was surveyed in 1857, does show the 10 or 12 roads coming into the area as we know them at the time of the battle. Now, a little history of the roads system. So the first settlers came into this area in the 1730s. And settlement beyond the Susquehanna River was really not opened up until 1736, although we had some squatters out in this area prior to that, and Marylanders had come north and lived in the area. But the first road that was, confirmed, and what we're talking about is taking a trail that people used and actually clearing it and making it so that carriage can ride on it. The first confirmed road as part of Lancaster County is the Old Monocacy Road that was officially laid out in 1740. And it basically connected York, Pennsylvania with Frederick, Maryland along the Monocacy River. And some of these early roads are on trails that had been used by Native Americans prior to them being laid out as roads. I thought it was interesting. I did this lecture a year or so ago, and somebody in the crowd mentioned, it was an old buffalo trail. And I had never heard that there were buffalo, in this area. And so I did a deep dive on it. And guess what? There are no buffaloes in this area. To have buffaloes, one would suspect we find like remains of prehistoric buffaloes or something. We certainly don't have any. But you'll see that once in a while on the internet. People talk about buffaloes and how they created roads for the early settlers. In 1747, while we were still Lancaster County, and just to clarify, we are the backwoods of Lancaster County until 1749 when York County is formed. And then we're York County until 1800 when Adams County is formed. But some of the townships, like Mount Pleasant Township and Germany Township and Cumberland Township, were laid out while we were Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And some of the early roads were laid out by the authorities of Lancaster County. And so the road that comes in to Abbottstown, what we would say the Lincoln Highway or Route 30 from York, is a 1747 road. And it went through the area that would later be New Oxford. And then the road branched off into two branches at the York Road, Swift Run Road intersection. And the northern branch of that road, which we refer to today as the Black's Gap Road, basically ran along Swift Run Road, Shriver's Corner Road, Goldenville Road, and Hilltown Road, if you can keep up with all that. I think I got it right. And I enjoy sometimes just driving that old road and looking at the houses along that road. Yeah. So you can go out to like past Cashtown and you can get on the Hilltown Road and ride down the Hilltown Road and back over. It's really interesting. But that's one of the oldest roads in the county. The southern branch of that road is basically Route 30 to Gettysburg, and then 116 to the area of Fairfield were connected with 16 at Zorra, which led from Emmitsburg over to Waynesboro. And this section of that road was laid about 1750. So there's some old houses along all the stretches of these roads. In 1750, they also laid out the Manawan Road, which basically is a road that led from York to the Manawan Meeting House, which was originally established at what today is called Center Mills. And then later they moved it over to near Bendersville. And I don't know if it ever really went. I don't know when this is a map drawn by somebody here at the Historical Society early on. I guess it connected to there. I question, or if it just ended somewhere in there. Okay. But just give you an idea, the early road systems were east-west because the settlers here were predominantly Germans and Scotch-Irish that were moving out into this area from the area east of us in Philadelphia. Later, the port of Baltimore will emerge as a trading post. And we're only 50 miles from Baltimore. And it's like 120 miles over to the Philadelphia area, and you got to cross the Susquehanna River. So after Baltimore emerges, and I would say in the early 1760s, that all the roads after that, there's a tendency for the roads to be north-south, but early on, they're east-west. And of course, in 1769, we have the Baltimore Shippensburg Road. And I think the Carlisle-Hanover Road is like, which is 94, is like 1770 off the top of my head. But anyway, that's the early system. Now, some of these roads are laid out before some of our towns. And, I find it interesting, wherever these early roads intersect each other is an opportunity for someone to place a tavern and make money. And our taverns and then our towns are established at these intersections, which makes a lot of sense. So here's the 1770 map of Pennsylvania. Nicholas Skull. He actually did a 1750s version of this, and then he added to it, but this is an updated version from 1770. And the website for the Pennsylvania Historic and Museum Commission has a really nice version of this map in color. And somewhere it was either there or the University of Pennsylvania Library, I downloaded a really high-resolution version of this map, and I put it on the wall downstairs in the museum. So this is York County, including, of course, Adams County, in 1770. And let's see, did I put a dot on here? Yeah. So there's where we are. There's Gettysburg. Of course, this is 1770, and Gettysburg is laid out in 1786. So this is prior to the town. That's why I put the circle on there showing you where the town is. And again, can you see the Abbottstown? And then, that's actually, here's the Swift Run Road, Route 30 intersection on this map. And I imagine that's Swift Run. And here you see Marsh Creek, and you see Rock Creek. And the town is between Marsh Creek and Rock Creek on this map. Do you see all the Presbyterian meeting houses? Of course, we have, Lower Marsh Creek Presbyterian Church, Upper Marsh Creek Presbyterian Church, Great Conawaga Presbyterian Church. There's the Manawan Meeting House. And again, near Center Mills along Possum Creek without the O. Why do you need to put an O in front of possum if you're not going to use it? So, and there's the Manawan Road, you see, that's laid out. So I love this. And then, of course, we have the Monocacy River down here, and then the Monocacy Road that is coming through, through Hanover here and down across. Also, one thing I like to point out on this map, and you'll find this on early maps, Alloway Creek is consistently referred to as Willoway Creek. I know that's probably not anything that anybody's concerned about, but people have argued with me about Alloway Creek and Willoway Creek. Also, we get some of the gaps. Willoughby's Gap, which basically is, Monterey Gap there, and Witherspoon's Gap. I don't know if anybody's on the Christmas tour. I tried to highlight the fact that the house we visited was is it Thomas Witherspoon's? I forget his first name. House up near Franklin Township Elementary School. Did anybody go into that house? Of course, it was a log house there originally, but Cashtown Gap is called Witherspoon's Gap. And again, this road shown on here is not Route 30 of the Chambersburg Pike coming from Gettysburg. It is Hilltown Road going out through the gap. Okay, so a couple things about the area. The first road I'm going to talk about is that east-west road that comes through Gettysburg. Basically, it's Route 30 east from New Oxford to Gettysburg, and then 116 to Fairfield. And you can see it on this 1765 survey. And it's called the Marsh Creek Road. And roads don't necessarily have names back then. And one road can go by a whole bunch of different names. So to me, it's enlightening when I find a map that tells us the name of a road. So the Marsh Creek Road. And basically it's called that because the early settlers, had tracts of land along Marsh Creek, in the Marsh Creek area. So Marsh Creek is an early name for this area. And sometimes people want to know the boundaries of Marsh Creek, or, sometimes people imagine that Marsh Creek Settlement is like a fort. I think they've watched too many Daniel Boone episodes. They live in a little stockade, and it's called like Boontown or whatever. Boy, I should watch it more. But no, it's a scattered bunch of farmhouses over a large area that has no real boundaries. But here's Samuel Gettys, and I always find it interesting. Here I'm saying Gettys, and I say Gettysburg, or we say Gettysburg sometimes. But in a lot of the early documents, they put an A in his name and make it Samuel Gettys. I did want to point out, this is I should use a different, less confusing map. But if you go east of town and you go to the Hanover Road, York Road intersection there, and you ride York Route 30 out towards Walmart, I want you to know that the original road did not come into town in that form or fashion. It actually, near the interchange, Route 15 interchange, swung south, and it actually came across the backside of the Daniel Lady property, crossed Rock Creek and came into the town. So they rerouted Route 30 east about 1808. But the original road would have come across the backside of the Daniel Lady property. And what we're talking about is this road would be on the backside of Giant grocery store, remember, is right there on this map. And so behind Subway and all that. So, and there had been talk for many years, there's been talk about putting a road in here so they can develop this area more. I don't know if you pay attention to Strabane Township's continuous expansion projects, so they can lower our taxes by increasing the tax money coming in, right? Oh, I hate that. So here's another little map. This is the Warren map of the battlefield. And I just thought I'd show you that the fences go along the old trace of this road, and you can kind of see where it used to come in down here. So some of these roads are rerouted slightly, but they had to build bridges, along the creek systems. That's one of the things if you're interested in the early roads all come down to access, and eventually you have to cross a creek. I guess early settlers had no problem in their wagons splashing through a creek, but later, there's going to be issues with that. And here is the original bridge. It was placed around 1808 on the York Turnpike. And you can only imagine what it was like to, they put bids out, they hired contractors, and they built these bridges. And a lot of these bridges are stone arch bridges. I'd imagine that allowed the water to run off of the bridge and not damage the roadbed or damage the stone portion of the bridge. And I don't know when they removed that bridge and replaced it. Basically, it's the bridge at Beer Mart. You know where Beer Mart is? We have Kmart, Walmart, Beer Mart. And we're actually looking south towards Culp's Hill from that bridge. I tell you what, though, I bet you it was quicker to build this bridge in the 1800s than it was to repair it when it was closed for 2 years just a little while ago. Do you remember that? And here's another picture of it from the 1880s. And you can see that people are proud of that bridge. Look, William Tipton went on and took a photograph of it. This is probably, this one is an 1888 photograph, I think. I don't know exactly when that is. But I would say that the York Pike is a turnpike. So there are different kinds of roads. There are roads that are built by the municipalities. The county builds a road, or a township builds a road in more modern parlance, or a private company builds a road. The private company would gather up money by selling stocks, and then they would use the money to purchase right-of-ways and to construct a road, and then charge money for you to use the road, especially if you had wagons that you were transporting goods from one area to another. And then they would make money and then pay dividends to the investors who bought stocks in their company. And the turnpike companies were very popular. A lot of them started the process, never completed, the road. But you can find along these roads toll houses. And on the York Pike, there was a toll house you can see beyond Rock Creek to the east, not far from where the brick kilns were, if you remember, the round brick kilns that were there for a time until the early 1990s, I believe. And they're called turnpikes because there was a gate across the road, or a pike. And a pike being like, a large spear, that's one of the reasons John Brown attacked Harper's Ferry. He was trying to gather up pikes to hand out to create to the slaves, so there'll be a rebellion. But a pike is just a long pole, and they'd turn it to the side like a swinging gate. So it was a turnpike. So I don't know if people realize that's why they call them turnpike, but there you go. There's all kinds of cool terms that we use today that came about during the early carriage era with these roads. Like, people would ride their wagons and they'd create ruts. And so the center of the road would be higher than the ruts, and it was called the highway. There's a whole book written on this turnpike slang. I think some of it is probably not exactly true, but it's all right. Now, once you go through Gettysburg on this early 1747 road, which later became a turnpike, it wasn't a turnpike right away. Sometimes a turnpike company would charter with the state to take over a road and improve the road and then charge money, and the state would allow that because they wanted the road improved and they didn't want to pay for it. So, but the Fairfield Road ran out west of Gettysburg. And an odd thing that a lot of people don't realize, there's no Chambersburg Turnpike. So if you went west from the square of Gettysburg, it was not called Chambersburg Street. It was called West York Street. And when you went down West York Street, you then veered off onto the Millerstown Road. So the original Fairfield Road didn't come off of Middle Street. The original road came out of the square and then rode across the area and down towards Fairfield. this road no longer exists. It was replaced by Springs Avenue, and of course they extended Middle Street, and they eventually just did away with this. But at the time of the battle, on this map, you can see that that road still existed. And here's a photograph taken in July of 1863 by the Tysons of Gettysburg, looking down the old Millerstown Road. Again, Middle Street's off to our right, and Springs Avenue, which was not put in until like 1868, comes across here to our left. And we're looking down a stretch of the road that no longer exists. And it would basically run through the middle of some of the houses along Springs Avenue today on the south side of Springs Avenue. So we're fortunate to have this photograph. I can't tell you how confused I was the first time I saw this photograph. What road is that? What street is that? You know, that street does not exist. And those houses are not there anymore. Here's an 1890s photograph, and this is taken from Seminary Ridge, looking directly down Middle Street towards the courthouse. Can you see that the vestiges of this old roadbed are kind of still there in this photograph, although it doesn't connect over to the Millerstown Road anymore. And then, of course, a few years later, they're going to build houses along the Springs Avenue and tear all these houses down. But there's a good photograph in between. And then, of course, if you go out towards Fairfield, you go out to some of the earliest properties in the county. This image is not on the 116 today. It's actually on, I think, what we call Her Ridge Road. But have you ever went out to Fairfield Road, and once you go by the Italian restaurant, what's the name of it? Clementines, that's it. Clementines, okay. It's good, I like it. When you go by that, do you notice that the old roadbed, if you veer off, it goes up the hill and over? And it wasn't until, I'm going to guess, the 1940s, they dug a hole through Breams Hill, and you go straight through and then over the creek. But originally, you had to go up and over the hill and then down. So we're on top of the hill looking out towards Fairfield, and that's the Black Horse Tavern building right there with their barn on the other side with some horse droppings there. And then, of course, the Black Horse Tavern was owned by the McClellan family, one of the early Marsh Creek Settlement families. And the original part of their tavern, which was torn down by by the 1890s, stood beside the current structure that stands, and that's dates from the 1740s. So the McClellan family had an early tavern out on the Fairfield Road, and then in the 1840s, the father had died, and the two sons took over a hotel in the square of Gettysburg. So at the time of the battle, the McClellan house was in the town of Gettysburg. But that guy's, there's two brothers. Their grandparents had owned a tavern early on out along the Fairfield Road. And here it is on the Warren map of the battlefield. At the time of the battle, it's owned by Francis Bream. And you can see the bridge that crosses the creek there. And again, you're going to have to, you might be all right early on splashing through some of these creeks. Can you imagine splashing through during a flood or splashing through in the middle of the winter? I'm sure the horses aren't going to like that too much. But here in our 1809 newspaper is a specific bid they put out for the construction of a stone bridge over Marsh Creek. I like this. On the great road leading from Gettysburg to Nicholson's Gap. Again, Willoughby's Gap, Nicholson's Gap, Nichols Gap, I've seen it. So, you can trace the evolution of some of these names in these sources. And here is the bridge that was probably built, like I say, 1809, 1810. And it stood for many years over Marsh Creek on the Fairfield Road. And here is a great 1890s William Tipton image of it, looking back towards Gettysburg with the Black Horse Tavern in it. And you can see, and you can also kind of see how people used to splash through the creek beside the bridge. Maybe they're using that just to wash their carriages. I don't know about you guys. So, where I grew up, near Big Pipe Creek, there was a place where you could drive your car into the creek and wash it. I can't believe I used to do that. So, eventually, there's an intersection created at the area of Gettysburg by the Baltimore Shippensburg Road and the York-Nichol Gap Road. Remember we just talked about Nicholson's Gap? Here they're calling it Nichols Gap. Or maybe they're just making a apostrophe S for Nicholson. We're just cutting it short. Maybe that confuses us. But I turned this around so it would be facing north. So this is 1785. And this is the separation of Samuel Gettys' land that James Gettys, his son, purchases in an auction and then creates the town of Gettysburg or Gettysburg around it. And you can see here on the map, Reverend Mr. Dobbin. So remember, he moved into the area about 1774, and in 1776 built the Dobbin House. So, and all these names. Again, I'm interested in the early settlers and who lived here. Now, we are very fortunate to have the original copy. It's actually not here at the Historical Society. It's at York County Archives. But it's the road from the Pennsylvania-Maryland line at, I think it's Adam Booz's. Does it say? Yeah, Adam Booz's, which is basically just south of Littlestown on Route 97 today, to the road coming in from Black's Gap, which is Mummersburg. So we have a map that shows the road as it was laid out from basically Littlestown to Mummersburg. The Baltimore Shippensburg Road, it would eventually be known as. And it's really, really fascinating. And it gives you the actual details of the courses and distances that the road is supposed to follow. Now, sometimes they give these courses and distances, and then the road ends up taking a slightly different route as they lay it out. Like maybe a farmer's like, hey, you can't go through that field, go to the edge of it. And so, the road isn't exactly laid out as stated. But starting at the top of the map near Mummersburg, you can see Sarah Black's Tavern. And the Black family had a tavern at the intersection of what is the Hilltown Goldenville Road and the Mummersburg Road today. And that's why it's called Black's Gap Road, I'd always thought, because the road leads from Sarah Black's Tavern over the Hilltown into the area west of Cashtown, Black's Gap. So, and John Black, I think maybe her father was the early minister of the Upper Marsh Creek Presbyterian Church. Could be her. I said father. Could be her husband, and she's the widow at this time. I apologize to any Black family genealogists who might know more about it. But what's really cool about this, it shows the places where people live. And of course, the McPherson family lived out there near Belmont Road. The meeting house is the Upper Marsh Creek Presbyterian Meeting House. See Robert McPherson. Miles Sweeney, he will appear in the end of the program when I do the Chambersburg Pike. But his house, we don't know where his log house was, but they replaced it by a stone house that basically we refer to as the Michael Christ House today. And that's on Black Horse Tavern Road out there west of town that runs between Route 30 and the Mummersburg Road. Miles Sweeney's grandson is Harvey Sweeney, who owns the Farnsworth House at the time of the battle. I know that's not important to you guys, but I live there. And he was a Revolutionary War veteran. And here is the area of the map as it runs through, maybe Gettysburg. See the A? Samuel Gettys. And again, I don't know these people. I don't know how to pronounce their name. Every descendant I've spoken with that is related to Samuel and James pronounces it Gettys. That's why we refer to it, I guess, as Gettysburg. But again, if we drive down south here, John Carson. Again, this is 1769. John Carson sold his property to Alexander Dobbin. So that's the Dobbin house. I wonder exactly who this Stewart guy is and where that might be. There's James Ferguson. And again, these two houses I kind of debate about where they are or what they could be. Laughlin McVeigh's house still stands. And I'll show you that in a moment. And Samuel Gettys' mill, no doubt about it, he owned the mill that would later become McAllister's mill. And then here it says down Rock Creek. So I think that's fascinating. And again, I like the road to York. Of course, York is this way. And here's kind of how that road, when you try to lay it out, drops on top of the town. And we debate about whether the original road was on what we call North Street or where it came, or if it was Racehorse Alley. But it clearly came in along what is now Wainwright Avenue and came into the town on an angle and then up to the site of the tavern, which was near the parking garage or a little north of it. So again, there's some debate because honestly, we have like two sources for this information. It's not like we have things to compare it to. Now, I mentioned that McAllister's mill is shown on the 1769 map. Now, that building is said to be built in 1790. So there must have been a wooden mill at that site prior to the stone mill. And here is the Laughlin McVeigh house, still stands. It was owned by Abraham Spangler. Of course, he owned the land back up to Culp's Hill. That's why it's called Spangler Spring. He had a tavern there for a while, and it just still stands today. It's a part log, part stone structure. Probably the log part is the original. You know what's interesting about it to me? It sits on a slight angle to the Baltimore Pike, which I've always been told means the house was there prior to the road. When you see that. And sure enough, do you know there's a driveway that goes from the back of his house out towards the area of Culp's Hill? And I think it's been a pet theory of Kathy George, the former park historian, that there was an old road that went down through the area of McAllister's Mill over Culp's Hill that connected into the town of Gettysburg prior to the Baltimore Shippensburg Road being laid out. And that driveway probably led out to that road. So at the time of the battle, that lane is used by troops during the fighting.
What year was that?
We don't know. It's on the 1769 map. So it's before that. And Laughlin McVeigh, it's not like we have a lot of records for early settlers in the area, but theoretically he lived here in the 1740s, theoretically. So here's a map. We do have traces of, this is the Baltimore Pike coming from town towards Rock Creek, and you can see that the area of McAllister's Mill on this early survey is shown as being owned by James Gettys' heirs, and John Fleming is James Gettys' brother-in-law. So, and of course, James Gettys' father, Samuel Gettys. So this all ties in. This is one of the houses that I think could be that Robert Stewart house that we were just talking about. this old house stood, or, depending on where the original road was, I could be wrong. It could be the Robert Ferguson house. Again, I don't know. We don't have that many sources to help us figure these things out. I can just tell you that's an old house. And after the Civil War, this house was used as a toll gate house for the Baltimore Turnpike. But at the time of the battle, the Peffers lived there. And we're fortunate, we're fortunate for this photograph. It was taken because someone told Frederick Gutekunst that General Meade used that house as his headquarters. He took a photograph of it and he titled it Meade's Headquarters. And sure enough, on like July 5th, General Meade is using that place as his headquarters on July 5th. So to give you an idea, and we'll do a survey to see how many people remember it, this house stood until the late 1980s, maybe 87. And it stood, if you remember it, directly across the street from the Stonehenge or Big Boppers. Today, well, I don't even know what it is today. Savorhood, the Pike restaurant. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Lincoln Social. Okay. Well, it'll have a new name soon. How many people remember seeing that building sitting there dilapidated, all falling down? You slept in it? Cool. I remember it being in very dilapidated shape. I don't think I ever wandered across the street into the property. I hate to say I was in Big Boppers a few times. Or the Stonehenge, whatever you want to call it. Before that, it was Bankert's Restaurant for people who want to go way back. But again, here's a map, and it shows, here's the Baltimore Pike, as we know, and this is that Peffer house we were just talking about. And so here's the cemetery, Evergreen Cemetery and the National Cemetery. But I got to tell you, the original course of the Baltimore Pike came into town on a different angle than it does today. And you can see it. Do you see the fence line on Wainwright Avenue going down towards the Baltimore Pike? That's the original trace of the road. Now in 1808, they rerouted it up and over Cemetery Hill and into the town. And here's a photograph of that original road. This is I think a 1900 photograph, and this is before the park laid out Wainwright Avenue. I colorized it there in the museum, you might notice. And here is after Wainwright Avenue is laid out. Do you see how they built a stone wall and they built the Park Avenue on top of the side of the hill? But the old avenue trace was still there and you could see it in these images. Question? Why'd they do that? Why did the Park Commission destroy the battlefield and desecrate the place where the soldiers fought behind? Yes. Oh, I understand. Why did they put it up and over the hill instead of keeping the original trace? I think they did it because they wanted to develop South Baltimore Street. Alexander Dobbin probably had a lot to do with it. And we'll talk about that in a second. Yeah, it does seem, you wonder why they do things, why people do things. Here's the answer I give to that, Ralph. So originally, Baltimore Street ended about Wall Alley. And then in this map, I guess Wade Alley. And Alexander Dobbin laid out lots along a trace of South Baltimore Street, just like James Gettys did. And this map is from like 1808. And you see how the Baltimore Road goes off and it veers over to Wainwright Avenue? And on his map, this is called the Tawnytown Road. And I think when they laid out the Baltimore Pike, when they changed the routing of it up and over Cemetery Hill, it entered the town here, and this all just became Baltimore Street. And probably James Gettys wants this to be the main road and not just a dead-end road that comes off of the Baltimore Pike, just for, business purposes. Incidentally, do you know the stream crosses the road right there? This is the lot at the Farnsworth house is on lot 5, and this is goes through the Farnsworth house beer garden right here. I live right there on 7. So this is how this works in relationship to where the old road was and where the new road comes in. And then there were lots laid out by Thomas Breeden along the old road bed that were never used. But Alexander Dobbin is a mover and a shaker. Unfortunately, I guess he dies in 1808, so we can't ask him these questions. Now, there are some vestiges of the old roadbed left, like that. Do you ever stop at the Jenny Wade birthplace and there's a little marker in the road and it says 52M to B? And that thing was placed there, I believe, about 1919, and it replaced a marker. And the guy who lived there had a garage, and years ago, he gave this to the Historical Society, and we have it on display in the museum. It's the original stone that was at that site that was pulled out of the ground when they put the new one in. And who knows how old that thing is. But that thing sat at that intersection, 52 miles to Baltimore. And there are more road markers that we have in our collection. This one, Philadelphia 108, York 22, Gettysburg 6. This was on the old, Route 30 East at Newchester Road. And I put those two on display in the museum. And, they had not been cared for very well. I was really interested in it. Again, there are things that were along these old roads. Just a few more things I want to talk about. I know I'm running on. North of town, it wasn't until 1829 that the Carlisle Road or Carlisle Street was laid out into the Newville Road. And look at this. Did you know that Carlisle Street used to be called North Baltimore Street? Because, again, it doesn't lead to Carlisle until they put Carlisle Street in. But if you wanted to go north of the town and get towards Carlisle, in the old days you had to go up past the square and then veer off onto Black's Turnpike. And that's the Mummersburg Road. And then you went over and up to a place, and then you went over on the Carlisle Road, the old Carlisle Road to Carlisle. Now that sounds confusing, but if you look at this right here, this map, this is the Warren map, you can see where all these roads come together. And you see this fence line? This fence line is the old Carlisle Road coming into the old Blackscap Road. And that house right there, Kitts Miller, not Kinsman, the Kitts Millers, that still stands. It's next to the tennis courts at Gettysburg College. And that's how the road used to go. And you know what? This is the 1938 reunion. And this is an aerial photograph of where the veterans camp. This is Howard Avenue. We are right there we're right there in this part of the building. And this fence line here with cars driving on it is like right outside the building. You can still see that fence line. And do you see this over here? Cars are driving on the original trace of the old Carlisle Road that no longer exists in 1938. I guess they knew the shortcut. Look at the traffic jam leading to the Eternal Light Peace Memorial. I just a couple other things. Again, we talked about the confusion of the Carlisle Road and the Table Rock Road. And even more confusing matters is James McPherson, who has this map in one of his books, the Cable Rook Road. What is that? How can Table Rock become Cable Rook? And again, it's the old Carlisle Road, and that's the Newville Road. You got the wrong roads. But this intersection is fascinating. This intersection, which is just north of Railroad Street, was there at the time of the battle. Can you imagine troops retreating into the town on those three roads and all intersecting at one spot in the town, and how much chaos and confusion that must have created? We do have an original trace, I should say, of the 1829 Newville Road also. Here on the Warren map of the battlefield, which is surveyed in 1868, you can already see that they have removed one of the trace of the Mummersburg Road leading in and replaced it. And I'd imagine it's a function of having three bridges or having one bridge over Stevens Run. And then by 1872, they've eliminated the trace of the other road that came in across Stevens Run, and that intersection by 1872 is no longer there. But today, there still is a stretch. Eventually, they'll remove this too. And then North Washington will continue all the way up to East Lincoln, or Lincoln, West Lincoln there. But this trace, called Mummersburg Street, is still there today. So for homework, go over to the college and walk along this stretch of the 1769 Baltimore Shippensburg Road. It's like the only thing we have of it. The Hanover Road was placed in after 1900. Do you know there's a covered bridge on the Hanover Road? Here on the John Batchelder isometrical map. You can see it in this 1890 photograph looking from Benner's Hill down across Rock Creek into the edge of the town. And the Emmitsburg Road is after 1800, the road that leads south through what is now the main part of the battlefield. That's one of those David Greenspan maps from the centennial history of the Civil War. And of course, the Mummersburg Road is important to us because of the fighting on the second and third day of the battle. And here's a great 1876 photograph, we think, of the fences along the Emmitsburg Road. And this road, while the park paved all the roads around the battlefield, this road was a dirt road for many, many years. And you can see, you can imagine the troops marching on these roads. They're muddy when it rains. They're dusty when it's not raining. And here's one of those Reed sketches from the 9th Massachusetts Artillery at the battlefield in the 1880s. And there's a whole collection of his drawings at the Library of Congress. There's the Sherfy barn on fire, the Rogers house, the Klingel farm. Oh, one I was going to point out, the Taneytown Road, laid out about 1813. Remember we said in 1808 they rerouted the Baltimore Pike? I've never seen any evidence of this whatsoever. So this is, I'm telling you, I'm massively speculating. But if you follow this trace of the Taneytown Road on a map, up and over Cemetery Hill through the National Cemetery and Evergreen Cemetery, guess where it comes out? On the Taneytown Road. Did the Taneytown Road originally go up and over through the cemeteries and connect over to the Taneytown Road? I think it did. But again, massive speculation on my part. And of course, at the time of the battle, the Taneytown Road, you can see again the condition of it. It's not one of our nicest roads leading into town. If you were building a road for people to go to, would you want them to go to Taneytown? I've been picking on the little towns as I go around. I think Taneytown I'm more serious about picking on than other places, though. I grew up near there. And here's a Taneytown Road in about an 1890 photograph of Basil Biggs in front of his farm, which was the Fry farm at the time of the battle. And look at that road, not in very good shape. And then one last road I wanted to talk about was the Chambersburg Pike. And we have a book downstairs. I have it on display. It's the grading book from 1812. I guess in 1809, the the Gettysburg Littlestown Turnpike Company, which had control of the Baltimore Pike, asked for the state to allow them to extend the road out to Chambersburg. And so they purchased right-of-ways and land, and they paid people for their land, and they extended the road out. They surveyed it, and they laid it out. And we have a book, and in the book, they tell you when they pass by different locations. We're actually coming from the west towards the center of the town. And look, the valley of Sweeney's Meadow, Sweeney's Lane. So we're near her tavern, the Sweeney farm, if you ride out, being to the right of Route 30 or the north of Route 30. I like this. Down here, they built a bridge over Willoughby's Run with an apostrophe S. So they use the apostrophes. And then there's a description of what the bridge should be built out of. So it's a 2-arch bridge. And then David McConaughey owned the McPherson farm, and they come into the town. And I think, I wonder if I put it in here. Yeah, the last page, it ends at the Diamond. See the road. So they paved it all the way to the town center, the town. And that was 1812. So here's an 1863 photograph from the edge of the town of Gettysburg looking towards Seminary Ridge. And you can see the macadamized road, basically meaning they put stones down. They probably got a giant keg, filled it with water, and rolled it over the stones and crushed them in some kind of oily substance to hold them down. And that's how it appeared right after the battle, and that little bridge. So the Federal Point, or the General Meade School, would be right there on the left. That's a Gutekunst photograph, I believe. Yeah. So we have Tyson photographs and Gutekunst both took photographs there, and there's the stones down on the road there. And then, of course, much farther out at Marsh Creek on the Chambersburg Pike, there was a stone arch bridge. And again, William Tipton loved to go out and take photographs of these bridges. We're fortunate. And we have a few photographs of these. And Andrew did it. He colorized them for me. But here's one that is probably from this photograph. I think it's about 1908. And here's a nice colored version of it. Believe it or not, I have not taken this photograph out there to see if those rocks are still in the stream. You think I would have done that. I haven't done that. You might see if you go over there, occasionally there's people parked there in a car fishing. And then just up the hill from that, towards Gettysburg, we have the Whistler House, where the first shot marker of the battle is. So the first shots of the battle were fired across that stone arch bridge. So there's one of that. Okay. So, I went a little bit long, but thanks for coming to my program today and learning about the 10 roads that lead into Gettysburg, or 12 roads, if you like. We'll let you, decide how you want to refer to them.